Good evening and welcome. My name is Chase Rind, and I have the pleasure of being the Executive Director here at the National Building Museum. And it is my pleasure to welcome all of you this evening for tonight's Women of Architecture lecture with Toshiko Mori. Tonight marks the 5th year of collaboration between the museum and the Beverly Willis Architecture Foundation to present the Women of Architecture series. The program aims to recognize and celebrate the professional and personal accomplishments of women in the field of architecture and is held each year during Women's History Month. I should note that today also marks International Women's Day, a global celebration that highlights the economic, political, and social achievements of women. So it is fitting that the lecture be held on this very important date. I am pleased to welcome back Beverly Willis, a founding trustee of the National Building Museum and president of the Beverly Willis Architecture Foundation, and also the namesake of our research library, as well as Wanda Bubrisky, director of the Beverly Willis Architecture Foundation. I am extremely grateful for Bev and Wanda's support in establishing and sustaining this program. In addition to a long and distinguished career in architecture, Bev can now add filmmaker to her resume, having written and directed the film titled A Girl is a Fellow Here, 100 Women Architects in the Studio of Frank Lloyd Wright. I now invite you to watch her documentary about the pioneering women in Wright's studio. The film will then be followed by Ms. Mori's remarks. Thank you.
Frank Lloyd Wright worked with over 100 women during his long career, in an era when most firms would not hire women. One of Wright's greatest legacies, and the least known, was the work of the women whose careers he encouraged. Here we explore the background and architectural work of 6 of those women architects who collaborated with Wright, hear their stories, and illustrate some of the work they designed. Work that rightfully belongs to and enriches the history of modern architecture in the United States. Wright, who was fired from Adler & Sullivan for taking commissions on the side, opened his first office in Chicago in 1895. Marian Mahony, whom he'd met at Adler & Sullivan's office, joined him a few months later. He was 28 years old. She was 24. 3 years later, Wright decided to build an addition to his house to accommodate his office, an elegant and beautiful studio. Some historians believe that Marian Mahony's master thesis project was the prototype for its design. Marian Lucy Mahony attended the Massachusetts Institute of Technology to study architecture. She graduated in 1894, MIT's second woman to graduate in architecture. In Chicago, after graduation, Mahony worked as a draftsman for a year, then left to join Wright. At 27, Mahony passed the new Illinois Architects Licensing Examination and became the first female licensed architect in the United States. The architectural historian Grant Manson calls Mahony the key figure on Wright's staff, equal to the rank of head designer. Rainer Banham said she was the greatest architectural delineator of her generation, which included mere men like Lutyens, Lois, and Wright. Though Mahony had projects of her own, including All Souls Church in Evanston, Illinois, She worked with Wright in the Oak Park studio for 14 years, longer than any other person and the entire first part of his career. In 1903, Isabelle Roberts became the second woman associate of Wright, staying for 7 years. Born in 1871, she came from a wealthy and socially prominent family. Roberts first studied architecture in New York City for 3 years at the Atelier Masquerade Chambers, which highlighted the classical architecture favored by the École des Beaux-Arts in Paris. Roberts joined Wright's Oak Park studio in 1903 and stayed to close the office in 1910. Despite Roberts' extensive architecture training, most historians have mistakenly stated that Isabelle's exclusive role in Oak Park was that of a bookkeeper, a strange allegation for a debutante listed in Chicago's Society Blue Book. In Wright's letter to the AIA in support of her architectural membership, he wrote, "Isabelle Roberts was my assistant in the practice of architecture for several years, and I recommend her without reservation to anyone requiring the services of an architect." Later in her life, the firm of Ryan and Roberts was among no more than a dozen architecture firms active in Orlando throughout the 1920s, and almost certainly the only one headed by 2 women. Ryan and Roberts created landmark buildings throughout Central Florida. Isabelle Roberts died in Orlando on December 27, 1955, at the age of 84. In 1932, in the middle of the Great Depression, when work was scarce, Wright founded the Taliesin Fellowship, the famed apprenticeship in Spring Green, Wisconsin, and later in Scottsdale, Arizona. There, Wright students, the Fellows, not only learned architecture, but constructed buildings, tended to the farm, did house chores, cooked, and took on whatever duties were required to keep the operation afloat. Besides employing women at his Oak Park office, from the start, Wright also accepted women at Taliesin. In fact, women made up a remarkable 20 to 25% of those seeking entry into an essentially all-male field. Wright treated women and men equally. The men cooked and cleaned. The women did manual labor like thrashing the wheat, cutting wood, or pouring concrete. "A girl," Wright joked, "is a fellow here." Lois Davidson Gottlieb attended Stanford University in the 1940s.
I found out a combination of art and engineering was what they called pre-architecture, so I thought that sounded like something to major in. When I saw the Hannah House, it was as if I had never heard music before and suddenly I heard a symphony or something. It was just a revelation to me, and I said, "This is for me right here."
Her teacher suggested she apply to the fellowship.
I said, "Well, what sort of a school is it?" And he said, "Well, it's really not a school, it's a way of life." So I immediately wrote Mr. Wright a letter.
Upon joining Wright, Gottlieb began as a draftsman.
I remember first I did lettering on drawings, and then I started making kitchen details. And then finally, that was in 48, and then finally by 1949, I did a whole house.
She also did manual labor.
I hauled, tons of rock and filled forms with rock and concrete, and got sand from the washes and poured concrete and more concrete.
Leaving Taliesin, Lois Gottlieb attended Harvard's Graduate School of Design for her architectural degree in 1950. After working for 4 years, she founded a design firm with her classmate at Taliesin, Jane Duncombe, and practiced in the San Francisco Bay Area. Later, in a life that took her to India and Europe, Gottlieb designed houses and provided design or construction services for a total of 100 projects. Jane Duncombe grew up 15 miles from Oak Park. She attended the Art Institute of Chicago and shared class space with architecture students from the Illinois Institute of Technology. Her teacher, Polish architect Maria Lilian, who herself was a visiting lecturer at Taliesin and an honorary apprentice, encouraged Duncombe to pursue architecture and go to Taliesin. There, Duncombe found Wright an encouraging presence.
I just put some flimsy down and worked on it a bit, and Mr. Wright came by several times in that phase, and he was very, very receptive to it. Actually, it was very nice.
Leaving Taliesin and passing the California Architect Licensing Examination, in 1951, Jane Duncombe opened her architecture office in Marin County, California. In 1954, she joined fellow Wright apprentice Lois Gottlieb, forming a partnership that ended 2 years later when Gottlieb moved from the area. She then founded Duncombe, Rowland and Miller, an association that lasted 9 years. Then Duncombe continued in her practice under her name for the balance of her career, working as an investor, architect, and contractor. Eleanor Pettersen attended the prestigious Cooper Union. Though she'd planned on becoming a painter, she was drawn to architecture while at Cooper Union. After graduation, she joined Wright first as a draftsman, since she'd had far more work experience than most of the other apprentices, then as an apprentice at Taliesin in Wisconsin, and Taliesin West.
Well, he was one of the architects I most admired, but also saw it as an opportunity to have a first-hand experience in the building process, which at the time that I was a young person, no woman could. You couldn't be in the building process. So I learned to lay shingles and lay stone, and do all these different things.
But she also was expected to cook.
Had this great anxiety attack every single day. And it not only had to taste very good, but it had to look beautiful. So that went on for a few months, and somehow I got out of that. I don't know how.
During that period, you weren't doing any architectural work?
Oh yes, then everybody spaded in the garden. They did their garden work, and you were part of a chorus. And if you were an instrumentalist, you rehearsed for that. And then you worked in the drafting room, you had things to do. There wasn't very much work at that time, but it was a beautiful life. The only thing, it was so insular that you didn't see anyone from the outside world, and it was a little like living on the moon.
Wright liked Pettersen, and she greatly admired him.
He was charming, he really was a beautiful personality, beautiful person, and I think, of course he was a genius, but he could have done anything and been a genius. I think he was a marvelous writer. He could sit at the piano for hours and just extemporize. So he's the last of the Renaissance men.
But not one who prepared his female assistants for problems they might encounter as women architects.
Don't forget, he lived way away from everything, in a sense.
So he didn't encourage you or discourage you?
Well, he was always complimentary, and that encouraged me.
He did?
Yeah. And I think if I hadn't gone to Wright's, I wouldn't be sitting here. There's no question about it.
Following Wright's example, she built a combined home and studio in New Jersey, where she lived and practiced throughout her long career. Pettersen achieved many firsts, beginning with being the first woman licensed as an architect in New Jersey, and the first woman in the state to open her own architectural office. One of her best-known works is the house designed for John Alford in Saddle River, New Jersey. President Richard Nixon purchased it and used it as his post-White House home for 10 years. She was lauded throughout her career. Weber grew up in Wilmette, Illinois, a small town just north of Oak Park. She attended the University of Illinois and the Art Institute of Chicago before she apprenticed for 6 years in the mid-1920s with a noted Chicago architect and renderer, Charles Morgan, whose office was above Louis Sullivan's studio. There she met Frank Lloyd Wright. In 1931, prior to the opening of the fellowship, Wright invited her to Taliesin, where she helped convert the existing building to one suitable for the arriving apprentices. In 1932, she signed up as a charter member of the fellowship. She stayed for 3 years. A year later, Reed Weber teamed up with a fellow Wright apprentice, Louise Dees Porch, to design and build vacation houses in South Carolina. The partnership lasted until 1939, when, to help win the war, she went to work for a naval architect. In 1946, Weber created a partnership, Katz, Weisman, and Weber, often collaborating with other architects and engineers. The firm specialized in hospitals, health facilities, and educational buildings, and executed work in New York, Rhode Island, Florida, Pennsylvania, and North Carolina. Over 30 years, in the mid-20th century, Elizabeth Reed Weber designed many prominent buildings in New York City. Robert Stern and his co-editors noted in their book, New York 1960, the underappreciated modernist collaboration of Katz, Weisman, Blumenkrantz, Stein, and Weber. In 1981, at the age of 72, Reed Weber finally was honored with a fellowship from the American Institute of Architects. However, until 2008, 18 years after her death, the American Institute of Architects membership rolls listed her as a man. Why, we ask, has there been so little historical scholarship on the work of these outstanding women architects? Why have the stories of women architects been built upon patriarchic language and historical inaccuracies that often shun primary source material for the narratives created within the secondary literature? Can we change this in the future? We must.
Wow, Beverly. That's a terrific film. Thank you very much. Bravo. Congratulations. And thank you. Thank you for your contribution to the history of architecture. This is a really amazing contribution. And now, for our speaker, in a way, our speaker tonight, Toshiko Mori, also has a working relationship with Frank Lloyd Wright, having just completed the award-winning Eleanor and Wilson Great Batch Pavilion, which is the visitor center at Wright's Darwin D. Martin House complex in Buffalo, New York. That design just recently received a 2010 AIA New York Design Honor Award for Architecture, and it is well-deserved. It is stunningly beautiful. Ms. Mori is principal of Toshiko Mori Architect, and her current work includes a master plan for New York University and infrastructure projects for the city of New York. She is also the Robert P. Hubbard Professor in the Practice of Architecture at Harvard University Graduate School of Design and was chair of the Department of Architecture from 2002 to 2008. Last year, she established a think tank, Vision Arc, which interconnects missing links in a global dialogue to promote a sustainable future. Toshiko's broad research-based approach to design has been celebrated with awards and exhibitions around the world. We are honored to hear from such an accomplished and influential architect this evening. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Toshiko Mori.
Thank you very much for invitation and wonderful and kind introduction. Beverly, thank you again for inviting me and making me a part of this event with the wonderful film, which every time I see it, I choke up because it's such a wonderful work for all of us. And for me, it's an interesting journey because, like one of the architects, Reed, everybody thinks I'm a man. I get all the males, Mr. Toshiko Mori, and it's just it's a very male-oriented profession. And to a lot of extent, place like Harvard, being a woman is an accident, and I can't help it. And of all things, I just never really thought about gender for a long time, and just for denial. But in my older age, I think, yes, it's kind of, I have relationship to my gender thing going on. This is a mechanical. And the things that I like to talk about is, as you have seen in the film, Frank Lloyd Wright was a role model and also a mentor to those women. And I have had mentors, but in my generation, I did not have a woman mentor, unfortunately. But I had wonderful mentorship from John Haydock, who was my professor, Cooper Union Dean, and later on I was hired to teach with him, and I learned how to teach and how to work with the students, an amazing and very generous person. And also, I have to say, another mentor in my school was Raymond Abraham, who passed away last week in Los Angeles by car accident after he delivered a lecture at SCI-Arc. And two of them, the giants of our time, have been very generous, and they basically treated us equally because they always called us by last name. They never called us by first name, and they just treated us. And both of them, it's about imagination, observation, being true to architecture, and be honest with oneself. One will be critical and then creative all the time. And so there's an ethical stance they instilled in me about being an architect, which has been very important. And later on, I went to work for Edward Larrabee Barnes, who also happened to be an incredible professional mentor, who just told me one thing when I went on my own, said, just be generous, just one word. And that resonated with me so amazingly throughout the career as practicing architect. And I can tell you there's something about mentorship is so important to next generation of architects, which many times is also for men as well as women, it's not being talked about as much. So that's the preface of my talk, but tonight I like to talk about, as entitled, Frank, Marcel, Paul, and me. It's just because by total, again, this is accident. I happen to work next to some of the modern masters buildings. And it's been a struggle, but it's been an inspiration. So within that, there's a dialogue with those modern masters, but also you will probably see my struggle to come up with my own language of architecture, getting over the father figures in architecture, finding somehow my own voice. Like my friend Carol Gilligan calls in different voices. So you might see a trace of me coming through the different voice. So I will start with the first project, which is, this is Paul Rudolph house in Florida, Sarasota, Florida, 1957. And my client had asked me to do an addition. This is a very Frank Lloyd Wrightian. This is before Rudolph went to Harvard, and he was working on experimental houses, and with the wood, with the climate of Florida, and also very Japanese in terms of Wrightian. It's very unusual, but in a sense, it's a very beautiful period. So what you see on your left is a broad house by Rudolph, and my addition is the other side of addition. So in a way, it's a dialogue. It's a separate house in the next property. And then idea is to have a language of Rudolph, materiality of Rudolph, even certain modulation of scale of Rudolph building. But because of contemporary requirement of Florida, flat house has to be elevated, and also durability, no longer you can build in wood, that it's steel and concrete construction, hurricane proof, and also it's in a very in a sandbar, so a structure had to be very, very much more different from how Rudolph has done. So this is a guest house in which what I do is I do interpretation of some of the elements that you have seen in the previous house by Rudolph, by roofers, and also openness, concrete blocks. And this house is connected by two wings and exterior stair. And this exterior stair becomes a social gathering space for this addition, which people gather and look back into the original house. And it's a bar house which is elevated, and you can have a view of both sides and bay and Sarasota ocean side at the same time. So this is actually one of the idea to work through the paradigm like what Rudolph has done, but in this case working again with modernist typology of PLT and raising it so that house itself, this is actually raised beyond, higher than regulated, so that house is within a canopy of trees to provide shade and privacy and so forth. And this is a stairway you can see back into old house, so there's a dialogue that goes back and forth. And again, very simple interiors, and in this case, the concrete as opposed to wood, but some of the proportional systems are similar. So in this case, I'm really working with a recalling of a language and a reflection in my interpretation of Rudolph architectural language here. So this is a plan of it. This is elevation, and but this is one of the things, interesting thing about it is that later on the guest house was built for their children, but they eventually got married and they have grandchildren. They took over the main house too. So parents had to have addition to the Rudolph house. So they came back and can you add an addition to Rudolph house? So this is kind of a conundrum because not only I have to deal with Rudolph, but I had to deal with my own building in dialogue with each other. So little reverse L to your left is this addition. But this one is a confrontation, not only a dialogue and a direct relationship next to, added to the Rudolph. So again, because of new regulations, concrete and steel, factors involved, and also it has a fine proportion which reflects the wood construction of it. So this is a small pavilion that's working off it, and it's qualified as an addition because of this trellis which is connecting it. So the idea for this addition is really to separate it, not to imitate it, but to have a continuity about it, but come up with, again, a very different language, which is very different from Rudolph and different from what I did for Guest House, and coming up with this particular pavilion for the parents as such. There's a little diversion, detour to the story I like to put in my lecture, which is about my material research. It's my material research on textiles. And I say that because this stair is totally built in fiberglass. The rod is 1/4-inch high fiberglass hanging from it. And entire stair is built in one piece by boat builder by laminated fiberglass and Kevlar. Very lightweight, weighs about 300 pounds, and 2 people can lift it. It's hurricane proof and assault and heat and rain proof. So the guest house I did a stainless steel, but as you can imagine, stainless is not stain free. So my client asked me, can you come up with a material which is durable, lightweight? And then since I was doing a textile research, but at the same time, Rudolph did a stair like this, but he didn't have this technology to implement it. So I like to do a little diversion of my textile research, and this is a stair which is being built. It's interesting for me to talk about textile because it's always weaving is associated with women's work, and it's can be done handiwork with manual, and also it could be produced mechanically and also digitally, which is very important for me, for someone doing a material research, that it has 3 modes of production. And someone like Annie Arbers, she was not allowed to study painting, sculpture, architecture. Women in Bauhaus, as you know, were only allowed to work on textiles. So there's a lot of creativity invested in Annie Arber's work. And later on, I have done exhibition of her work. I'm actually doing a pavilion of her collections outside of New Haven. But she has included really material invention in terms of combining industrial and natural materials to come up with a textile that has high performance, in this case, acoustic, and also reflective, worked with sound and light. So this is amazing invention, which is not really looked at as much. But this was my inspiration to look at this. And also I've done exhibition design for Museum Modern Art, contemporary Japanese textiles, in which there's a very beautiful handmade, organically produced textiles, as well as something like a fishing net with high-tech fishing net for Japanese who care a lot about appearance of food. So when you catch a fish with this net, you don't harm it. So you have a perfect fish for your table. I think Frank Lloyd Wright would have approved of that technique of food presentation. And then I also did a research and advised and done an exhibition called Extreme Textiles, Designing for High Performance with Matilda McQuaid at Cooper Hewitt Museum. Again, this was a very interesting moment for me because something which is what you call distaff production of something like textile and weaving is now becoming a most advanced material research, high-tech and high performance in industrial, medical use, and technological use. So there's this shift, what I call is feminization of technology. Is something I'm really writing about. It is really changing a lot in terms of how we instinctively think about something like technology, which will really associate with more like a male, macho, with a hammer and nails. Instead, everybody's working with soft, light, flexible materials such as technology. And look at these gears; those are felt gears, and they absorb the lubricant, and it's very quiet when it's operated, but it's as hard as a steel. So, and also it doesn't have to be as hard as a steel, but it's very interesting to really embrace the softness of a textile. and also different climbing ropes. Some of you might be climbers. And as you can imagine, also, this is a braiding technique. It's something very primitive, something your grandmother taught you. It's really domestic technique is turned into a very high-tech extreme sports machinery. And then you can have a different techniques with a weaving pattern of those textiles. Carbon fiber, Kevlar are transformed into different type of sports equipment, and these are medical devices, and some of them are sailing. This is, instead of weaving, the man is going around laying out the textiles. Yellow is Kevlar, white is fiberglass, black is carbon fiber. So in a sense, they are making a patterning of it to make the most high-performance sails. The boats that just won America's Cup sailboat, they have this particular sailing technology, which is incredibly responsive and precise in place. Now, without your grandparents, grandmothers, and great-grandmothers' development of weaving technique, this is not happening. So that's what's interesting. And for example, this is a factory in Britain which makes laces, traditional laces, as opposed to weaving, which is warp and weft. This is like a field, so you can have a free flow patterning. And with the same technique and same technologies, they are developing the patches that you see on the right, which goes into, as a medical device, into your muscles to cure the muscles. And with high technique, nanotechnology, kind of get absorbed into your body. And in a way, it becomes a part of invisible layer that helps to maintain the muscle. So this is really happening now with this amazingly decorative feminine technology of the 19th century now into 21st century cutting-edge medical devices. I think that's a really interesting observation, which we will probably be able to use and borrow that technique into architecture in micro scale, nanoscale, or something like felt, which is a Mongolian tribe's technique. Women have beaten up wool to make them, and then integrated with lighting, LED lighting. This is made into a flooring of aircraft and some of airline things. And this, again, some of the gears and felt ideas. So this is how the layout of high-tech textiles, Kevlar, and they can make any different patterns they like in terms of digital techniques, simulating with computer. And what's interesting about is warp and weft is binary structure in weaving, which translated directly into electronic circuit of on and off. So something like a jacquard loom in RISD's textile department is taking a Mac and just doing wild patterns out of this. And with advanced material, one can be creating an amazing material. So this is a prototype I built with a boat builder who built that stair, and a boat builder in Bristol, Rhode Island, who actually did make the house for America's Cup sport, which also won recently. And idea for it is to make a prototype for shelter which is resilient against lateral forces, which you see in Haiti and other earthquake zones. Many of the buildings are really weak against side forces, and then also light enough, and you can actually make multiples of them. So this particular technology is incredibly suited to make a lightweight hurricane and earthquake-resistant material. So it's something the research I'm working on. And just to explain it, the principle of it is this is a bulletproof piece of a fiberglass layer piece you can see on the side. It's in layers. It is embedded in the wall for bulletproof vaults and bulletproof rooms for executives and so forth. But the way it is a bullet hits it, and textile disperses the forces laterally, so you really don't need a thick concrete block to counteract the same kind of impact. It just has this counterintuitive idea of dispersion of forces instead of resisting it. It's more resilient rather than resistant. So this is a really paradigm shift in terms of thinking about materials. And same technique is used to build a bridge in Maui, Hawaii, in a remote area where it cannot be reached, can be dropped off. And something like carbon fiber is same strength as steel, but 1/6 of a weight. So this idea of weight and less material. And carbon fiber happened to be a byproduct of oil production. So in a sense, kind of taking advantage of something which has already been produced. So that stair is using that type of technique, but uses a detail like tailoring and darting and seaming, like more of a technique of tailors to make into architecture. So I just wanted to put this into because this is part of research, but sometimes I put that in. So this is a stair. And now back to the main theme of Frank and everybody else. This is Marcel Breuer's house, his own house in 1951 in New Canaan, Connecticut. He lived here for nearly 25 years. And the reason I have encountered this house is my client had called me and told me that they were trying to demolish this house. And this is usually called Marcel Breuer House 2, and it's gone through many modification renovations so that it's not listed as a premier Breuer house in many of the monographs. And since it's gone through many of the modifications, developer bought it, and there's a plan for McMansion on the site, and it was slated to be demolished. So this is an interesting instance. The client intervened and put a stop demolition order. We both decided it's worth saving, but it needs an addition. So this is really not as a gentle dialogue I had with Paul Rudolph in beautiful Sarasota, but this is a tough New Canaan climate. Try to save it, but to what extent can you save and can you actually add and still honor the legacy of Breuer? So this was actually a much more difficult problem for me. And this was existing condition. And what I thought of Breuer, and also Breuer was a professor at my school, and I read many books about him, how he taught in sort of materiality. And signature of Breuer is his walls and this stone masonry. And it looks like random, but it really not. It's very methodical. You can see horizontal layers, and there's randomness. It's incredibly precisely calculated. So we really took this as something of this wall, as keeping that as a Breuer flavor or Breuer signature, to try to do everything except to intervene with this thing and somehow celebrate that. So this was the state we have inherited it. There was addition made, a little rectangular to your left, but this masonry structure has deteriorated, and then pool house was added, but pool and pool house were in good condition. So we have taken from that state, we had to take down the addition, and we had to put a new addition. So this is what I did, and usually, if you know Breuer's work, when he does another pavilion next to it, that's a strategy, right angle relationship to each other architecturally. So he would have done that, but not to make a mistake that somebody else has done that, the connection is in a diagonal, a very different geometry to make two of our wings connect together. And then we have kind of rebuilt and restored the pool and pool house itself. And there was an existing opening in the house where the connecting stair is emanating from. And idea is that the lower and upper floor of the addition, whenever one goes through the stair, the landing is the original house. So in daily life of this family, going up and down between a main part of a house, which has living room, kitchen, dining, and going back to bedroom, they're always experiencing this transition between old and new. So this ritual of understanding what was original, what is new, is sort of programmed into the life of this particular family. And the biggest move I made is to raise a clear story, introduce a clear story. This was about less than 8 foot high, tall ceiling. And these houses, when Breuer made, is always experimental, made for himself. In fact, for this house, I had to, when we found out that all the radiant a heating floor, which is a beautiful flagstone. When we had to remove it to replace all the piping, we found out that there was really no foundation for the columns, and the foundation were all cinder blocks, so we really had to dig out from under and then pour the foundation over. But at that time, I got a very nasty letter from Duncombe saying, "What are you doing to Breuer House? You're destroying the whole thing." So we had to write back, no, we are really repairing it. We numbered all the stones, we are totally putting back. But I had to ask them, where were you when we really needed you? Because this house was to be demolished. You said nothing. And my client had to write stop demolition order letter and a check to the town to save it. So please leave me alone. I'm going to show. I'm going to. So they left me alone. I haven't heard anything since then. And also because of the skylight giving a light, plus this family is tall, so 8-foot ceiling was quite oppressive to the kids and so forth, but also bringing light. And another strategy is that if you know Breuer's work, he always has connection to earth and the sky. And this house had a connection to earth, but didn't have a connection to the sky. So that's something we wanted to introduce. So that, and also intervening on the ceiling plane and keeping a wall intact was something we really wanted to work through. So that became a theme and connects to the glass connecting stair. It becomes a right angle skylights and glass wall in addition facing north. So this is a model which kind of shows strategy for our addition here. And it shows elevation. So this is under construction, in which how we are restoring it. And that's the interior of it, you can see it. And the second floor and second soffit, right above where the cylinder is intervening. That was the original ceiling height, and that data was kept throughout the house, again, as a marker to understand that was where the original and everything else was added to it. So that's a connection, and again, addition was raised above the garden wall so that it kind of floats above it. Also noted it's above it. And in this case, this was to give a monumentality to smaller house by change of materiality, such as glass, which has a very different, some of inside is clear, exterior is a mixture of a translucency, transparency, and degree of opacity. And then this is a transition coming from below and going upstairs as such. And this is a stair from inside. A private side is clear glass, and more public side is opaque side. So really, so the family can run around naked, no one will see you. So this is a night view of this particular pavilion. In a sense, it's become a ritual between going from new to old as such. So that's where the wing is. You can have a peek through into the original house, and beyond this pool pavilion that you see. Again, you'll see pool pavilion, an actual pavilion of a pool. It's actually more underground in that instance. It kind of shows some of the details of the glazing. And again, it has a different mutability so that it softens the effect of glass. It's not all clear glass, so the volume has much more mutable, softer quality against more of a solid quality, immateriality of a stone of original house. And this one also has a reference to a detailing of a Breuer stair as something. This is probably more imitative move I have probably made than anything else, but this was addition, so it needed to have some of signature of connection of Breuer connection. That's that particular detail here. Now, before going into Frank Lloyd Wright, I had to confront another guy named Edgar Allan Poe, which is, what can you do? It's a literary figure, another major figure, and it's in Bronx. This is a project for New York City Parks Department. And a cottage to your right, this was where Edgar Allan Poe lived from 1846 to 1849. This was his last cottage. This is where his wife died. He wrote Annabel Lee's, and he left this cottage and then went to Baltimore and died, and it was one of the tragedies. And it used to be across the street. They moved there. It's called Poe Park. And his furniture cultures here. Strangely enough, more Europeans know about this cottage than Americans do. And so Parks Department wanted to, this was competition to do a visitor center for Poe Cottage. And on the other side is a very vibrant community of a present. On the one side, the past of Edgar Allan Poe. The other side, it is a present of a bandshell. Which is very jazz festival, markets, a lot of kids. It's an incredibly vibrant community in the Bronx. So in a sense, this visitor has two sides to it. That's the cottage of Edgar Allan Poe Cottage. It's a lovely little house, really. It's very unusual. And so it's a historical society. When there was a guy living in a basement. It was really, really strange. But I think there's a caretaker does live in there in a very true fashion to Edgar Allan Poe's his own writing. And the plan has two sides. Again, to your left is a big bathroom, public uses and so forth for more use for public. The other side, more contemplative side, with a window framing a Poe cottage. And the plan looks like it's a broken plan, and everybody enters from either side of a park, slipping into it instead of going straight onto it. And because I did a lot of reading analysis, as you can imagine, was Paul Rudolph, Marcel Breuer. I do, and I'm academics, I can't help it. I do a lot of research before I do projects. And when I was reading, I discovered that Edgar Allan Poe had two sides to it, which is arabesque and grotesque, described by Daniel Hoffman, who is a poetry professor at Penn. Arabesque meaning he has these beautiful tales of going on balloons and far away, and everybody credits him as a father of science fiction, looking into the future. And then what you call grotesque, of looking at the more horrifying nature of human beings and horror. So grotesque and arabesque is two sides to it, in present and past. So the plan itself is kind of slipping into each other, broken, not quite being able to reconcile. So this is a kind of little bit of a dilemma I wanted to create in this. The roof line is rising or falling. The park volunteers, they call themselves ravens under the ravens poetry. So it has little of a sinister qualities. They all run around in black, but they don't mean it, nice people. So there's this rise and fall of park. But with Edgar Allan Poe, it can't really be totally optimistic and cheery. There's something about pensive side I wanted to really express it. In the bathroom, men's and women's bathroom, this is a digitized pattern of Edgar Allan Poe's portrait in it. So when you go into the bathroom, you think something is up and you go back and say, oh my God, everybody gets a little freaked out, but that's okay. So that makes it interesting, I think. And then also kids will start thinking, who is this guy? And they'll start reading cool poetry or scary. Kids love scary stories, by the way, so it's kind of being a good educational material. So this one is under construction and opening up, and I have used exterior, just like taking Edgar Allan Poe's uncanny idea. It's roof shingles that's traditionally used for New England. It's an incredible durable material. In New York City, we have to pass what you call commissioner's test. Past commissioner, really, Adrian Benapi, literally comes and has to hit the building with a baseball bat. So this does pass the test, but also that little feathery effect of ravens and New England material, American materials, some roof materials. This bit of uncanny is part of it. And this kind of leads to Frank Lloyd Wright, Darwin Martin House, 1906, Buffalo, New York. And this is quite an intimidating project for me. This was a competition. And this is a plan of Darwin Martin House. And he himself called it a masterwork. He kept his plan next to his drafting table all his life in his office. It's probably one of the most elaborate compound of houses, from his sister's house to carriage house to conservatory and to pergola. So in a way, every time I go to the house, I discover something new. There's so much was involved in building this particular house. And innovation of this house is that there's no nothing like rooms. It's the first open plan. It's all piers dividing spaces and ceiling plane defining spaces and uses. So if you look at this plan, which is enlargement of interior plan, it's an incredibly innovative way of discovering how one has to live, house without walls, really. So it sits in a neighborhood which is designed by Olmsted. And as you can see, it's quite big house for that period. Darwin Martin was Bill Gates of his time. Buffalo was eighth wealthiest city in the nation at that time with his trade and so forth, and he invented mail order business. So if he's alive, done well, he'll be richer than Bill Gates for sure. But there's a decline of family, and it has changed the hands. So the non-profit organization Darwin Martin founded, Darwin Martin House has taken over the property, and I have to say this is one of the most amazing grassroots effort by neighbors. They started on their own and citizens, and they decided they have to take back this house and restore it, and they raised nearly $50 million to rebuild a pergola and restoring a house and purchase adjacent property to do a visitor center. And the visitor center here is in relationship to Darwin Martin House is adjacent property, but I took the module of a pergola so that it relates more to the landscape rather than the house itself. So sometimes it's been called garden pavilion at the same time. So it has a reference of modularity and some scale and some structural texture of the house, but then it's very different. Again, right angle against Darwin Martin House. It's really nearly the palimpsest. If you really rotate it, it kind of fits to it. So in a sense, it's a very abstract, notational house. So in this house, I had to work like language. If Frank Lloyd Wright does brick, I do glass. If he does a hip roof, I do reverse hip roof. So in a sense, I'm going against him all the time. There's a dialogue that goes on in this particular pavilion as an abstract language and contemporary language. Again, it's very low and small, and in a sense, it had to be a monumental on its own, so that was a huge challenge for me. The size does not have anything to do with idea of monumental scale. It had to have its own presence, but also it cannot be overwhelming Darwin Martin House, but at the same time, it has to participate in a language of this particular site. It has to be read as contemporary new edition, but also the part of a family, as if a new child just arrived, like, hi, I'm here, but make me a part of a family. So innovation of this house is that infrastructure and structures such as heating, gas, later electricity, and also ventilation, furniture are all built into this pier system that you can see. And that was inspiration for my projects. As a main structure are supported by 4 piers in center. And the back wall is all concrete, pouring place concrete wall. Is there for a mechanical stairs utility, and street side it is a triple glazed glass pavilion. And as you can see, mullions there are really structural column. It's only about 2 by 2, and it's helped to support it. I can explain it a little bit later. And reverse hip roof. And I worked with structural engineers from SOM Chicago, Bill Baker, who've done Burj to Dubai, but same time, but he kept saying he likes this project much more. But in fact, they won a structure award for this project, not for Burj to Dubai. So it's very interesting about that particular, and they really put in a lot into this investment. Of course, being Chicago, they totally get into this structural innovation of Frank Lloyd Wright and cantilevers and so forth, appearance of cantilever. And Buffalo has a lot of snow, like 8 feet. And this structure is designed to receive it because snow is an excellent insulator. So it does help to insulate this pavilion. We have thought about it. I understand you have a lot of snow now. So Buffalo has it all the time, every year. So that's the kind of structure analysis we have done. And for some of you, it might be interesting to see that some of the mullions, we call mullions, because mullions and columns, they're stainless steel, they are also taking a lot of
dead load. And then piers are taking a lot of horizontal load also. And then it appears to be cantilever, but it's really supported on perimeter. So that's how it's working it up. And this detail was very difficult, but I wanted the glass wall to come straight from the ground because Frank Lloyd Wright always talks about how a building rises from the ground, grows from the ground. So as opposed to Miesian detail, floating glass, it's really rising out of it. And a triple glazing is about 15'6" high, and it goes to 18 feet because it flares up. It's supported cantilevered at the base. As you can see on the top, it's floating. It's really cantilevered straight up, and it's not secured at the top at all. And it's eliminating a need for mullions. It's all butt glaze at the same time. So in a sense, this was also interesting collaboration of structural engineers. And then climate engineer, Transolar from Stuttgart, Matthias Schuler, he came up with initial concept for it, and later on, Landmarks implemented a mechanical design for it. So this is kind of design. And Matthias' idea is to do this very simple idea. And this building is not LEED certified. My clients are nonprofit. They said, I don't care about LEED plaque. Make sure we don't use energy. They're really concerned about the bills rather than the plaque, which I totally understand. So we really went for it at a high-performance building. Snow accumulation, insulation really does help in insulation. Triple glazing is keeping, and also because of a particular orientation, there's a heat gain in winter when they need it. And we have used a geothermal heating and cooling, which is also used for the old house. And again, Frank Lloyd Wright had this service spaces in which one can actually hide all the systems, and in this particular pavilion, there's no ductwork. It's totally, air is circulated from displacement ventilation. It has CO2 sensor in it, so it really changes the velocity of air, amount of air coming in. As when 2 people is there, or 60 to 180 people, it really automatically senses it. So there's incredible intelligence in this. And because it's radiant heating and cooling, when there's a heat gain in the middle of winter, it acts as a heat sink, and then it brings up it really that harvested heat is giving that up at nighttime. And western wall, solid west, to insulate against prevailing west wind coming from Great Lakes, and snow light as daylight reflector, so that this pavilion, because of angle of roof and reflecting off light color floor, they don't need any artificial light for 10 a.m. to 4 p.m., let's say from April to November when they're operating it. So again, really cuts down in the bills, really. That's geothermal locations. And also for experience, we have this really spaghetti loop, and driving engineers crazy, but so that you don't hear the noise, that you want to have a much better experience of visitor experience, and looking at, this is kind of a, and in terms of lighting, we have done, there's no lighting in a ceiling surface. Everything is reflected in direct lighting from a perimeter, and also lighting embedded in the exhibits themselves. So the idea level is probably less brighter, but it's completely, totally acceptable lighting level for this particular. So in a sense, we really had a sensitivity about the type of quality of lighting here. And opened last year. This is how it looks. And also it really works as a vitrine to the western elevation of the house. And the visitors' experiences, yes, one would go into this visitor center and one would have orientation. So your mind is set up and framed with exhibit to see what you are going to see. And I just want to talk a little bit about the back wall. Back wall is 100 feet cast in place concrete. And this was quite an amazing work by the contractors, but we wanted to imitate, this is to your right, to the gold one, that's Frank Lloyd Wright's a brick, wanted to imitate that particular pattern, and inside of a house he had painted mortar joints all gold so that bricks will float. So we really want to have a very deep causing to have this kind of palimpsest idea for this particular wall. And this glass wall is it has a layer in which it received holographic projections, so you can actually see the projection. I can show a little bit later, so it becomes an exhibit element like that. So there's 6 images. You can see 6 images Frank Lloyd Wright, but they can look at Academy Awards or Buffalo Sabres game, and it has multi-purposes for different projection, but you can do amazing creation of films and so forth. So this is something visitors get a little nervous. They go in there, all of a sudden his image appears and they get a little scared. But it's part of it. So that's a view of it, and understated exhibit for this particular purpose. I will show 2 more projects, and then again, last one will be Vision Arc, which is about paradigm shift idea. Because this is an interesting idea, again, a pavilion, but in China, in Jinhua, it's 4 hours south of Shanghai, master planned by Chinese artist Ai Weiwei from Beijing. And his father, Ai Qin, is a very well-known poet and novelist. And, but he was persecuted during the Cultural Revolution, but then he was reinstated, and a monument for his father was built. So in the very bottom diagram, the red is where this architectural park is. The south of the park is a park to honor Ai Weiwei's father. And also Herzog Jimeon has done enormous amount of master plan to do a new city. And the other side of north of it is where the old city is. And Ai Weiwei's idea is that this is probably prime area for development, but unless it's converted into a public park, which is an accessible, usable public park, even today. This was a couple of years ago. It's a new idea in China. And he's invited about 20 of us from all over the world. From America, me and Michael Maltzon from you, and several Chinese architects, Japanese architects, and Swiss architects. So we went into a microurbanism symposium, and he came up with a ballot box, some communist red box, a ballot box, and we picked up each piece of paper and was assigned what it was. So my pavilion was newspaper cafe. And in China, many people are too poor to buy newspapers, so they have a traditional wallpaper in which they display paper. And they're all looking at it. And also it's a microeconomy. And that's one of the things Ai Weiwei wanted each pavilion to give jobs to somebody. But he was saying that this is a newspaper pavilion in Beijing near Forbidden City. As you can see in speaker, it's a propaganda machine for the party. And in a way, it's a very double-edged sword about this particular pavilion. It's right at the entrance, and it's very, but it says newspaper pavilion, and I told him I really need to make sure that I like to have them able to display all the paper from all the world. Ai Weiwei says, you design that, but don't say that, because you'll get in trouble about, I said, freedom of media, no censorship, says, don't ever say that. Displace everything you say, freedom of media, censorship with propaganda, and you just get through the government review. So. And I think it was interesting for me because Ai Weiwei, as a kind of dissident artist, was saying that you build in democratic ideals in the architecture. They may not use it that way, but if you build it in, they will eventually be used that way. But if you don't have that agenda built in, then you will really be complicit with the government, and you're really not having any effect. So it's a very small pavilion. And so that a newspaper, I just showed Chinese newspaper standard size, but the module is so that you can have New York Times, Wall Street Journal, anything, Le Monde in it. So it has a built-in system of being able to display, and this become a facade, and people will come and gather. But also I said this is a place of gathering, and it wasn't really accepted, but they built it. So it's a small pavilion, and you can come up and become a viewing platform on the very top, and solid side is facing south, which can be very hot. And then north side, they are putting in newspapers now for opening day. So this is kind of what it looks like as a pavilion. So it's free, people can come and look at it. And Chinese officials like the idea because I presented as to celebrating literacy of a country, and they have thousands of newspapers, and this little pavilion can have about 2,500 newspapers. It will be a great display for this literacy and idea of thriving journalism. I know, it was a little hard for me to convince them, but it's there in a way. And last architectural project I show is a project which just opened on Friday in Syracuse, New York, Center of Excellence for Energy and Environmental Systems. Downtown Syracuse, it's a contaminated site. And where you see a little dome is called Career Dome. That's where Syracuse famous basketball team plays. That's a campus. And it's really intersection of a downtown. They have this urban corridor. They are trying to connect city and university by transportation systems and housing. So Mark Robbins, the dean of Syracuse, has been very, very active in that. So COE is right there. And actually, this is right next to Erie Canal, which was buried under. So in a sense, they want to resuscitate this particular tradition where another infrastructure in this way is environmental infrastructure. The holy grail of this inflated holy grail, I have to say, of a scientist is that this started before any Obama tax credit was available. So they were very disappointed, but they said that one thing they can prove is this scientist, specialist of indoor environmental quality. And they made, at that time, federation of 15 federation of corporation, universities like Cornell and Rensselaer, to study quality of environment of human beings, such as the effect of artificial lighting, natural lighting, view, and velocity of heating and amount of fresh air exchange, to really study what you call a productivity. So their argument is that, granted, they can't depend on any tax incentives or any policy changes. One can prove that by improving human productivity, as focusing on quality as much as quantity in terms of environment as energy savings, that if you increase productivity by 1% in general office building, that becomes equivalent of total cost for corporation for energy cost. It's just because human salaries are the highest cost for any businesses, so that they will be able to convince businesses to invest in sustainable building, better quality of building, better environmental quality. So that was their very, very ambitious environment. And New York State and Central New York, they all bought into it, and looking at something like a scientist, which is a big mess. And idea is also, for me, is why don't we make this transparent? Why don't make it open? And this was before the scientists, recent scientists, climate scientists got into trouble for concealing or not really having information open. So they're actually interested in lab as curated space and having it visible, not only physically, but make it open source, share the data. So this has really a change of environment in terms of scientific research, sharing, collaborating, and then monitoring a building, monitoring the results of their, testing their results, so that there's amazing collaboration going on. And this is kind of how you might want to look at the idea. The program is at the top is TIEQ, Indoor Environmental Quality Labs. This is where the human people, they don't torture people, I assure you, but they test humans in terms of productivity. Interstitial is where they put in air conditioning, lighting systems. They monitor the machinery is there. The beta labs is when they actually testing metrics of quantifying metrics of air conditioning systems. So beta is quantity, TIEQ is quality. And then we have offices for headquarter offices. Now they have 200 partners all over the country, and some of them international partners. They're working on some, they get research, they come in, use these labs. And this probably is one of the first labs in the world to really testing this human effect of humans in terms of environment. And entry lab and labs, the tail of labs, which is traditional labs. It has water channel, and then it has biofuel labs, material testing labs, and mechanical room below. And again, to make the whole results transparent, but people are far enough so that you don't look at proprietary materials. There's a gallery as a catwalk, and those are the partners from Korea Corporation, which is the originator in Syracuse, to Siemens, which provide a monitoring system. So this was a very clever idea. This is called Living Lab. And so the building operates as offices, classrooms, but also they have a change of machines and change of photovoltaic panels, testing all the time, and also providing a spaces for startups to provide green product to be used as a showcasing and also. And I have to say, we saved a little bit of money, quite a lot of money, by getting free elevators, for example. We have a pair of elevator from what is called regenerative elevator. And what it does is when it when it comes down, it regenerates electricity. So it regenerates its own electricity to move it itself up. And also it actually does produce excess electricity to kind of provide for the other uses in the building. Or startup like Anna Dyson's solar power harvesting cell, which is installed as a testing bay, and which is, collects 500 times more solar heat and for converting into electricity and heat. This is really testing going on right now. And a TIEQ lab, which has simulation, which I was talking about a little bit. And as you can see, what's unique about this is these spaces available for people to tour so they can see it. So if opening was Saturday, I think it was mobbed. I can't understand how people are interested in plumbing or ductwork, but they were like really liked it, like a machine, background machine. So what you see in little labels going across horizontally, that's really to monitor human individual cells. This is also first in the center, is monitoring each individual microcontrol. They are also trying to prove that instead of heating and cooling a macro environment, optimizing personal environment, what each person feels comfortable is really optimizing, but that space doesn't have to be the entire height of a ceiling here. So in a sense, you save an incredible amount of energy used by actually making a better environment for each individual person. So this is very important research that they were working. And we had to do this. This was a consortium of not only engineers, because they're scientists doing it, so it's 40 to 50 people were there all the time discussing conservation strategies, what is best, what they want to test. And so there's a kind of list of things we are working on, and sustainable strategies, alternative energy production. And we had geothermal bore field. And we looked at biomass cogeneration, it's capable. So we were actually, our charge is to design a building so it can sustain on its own footprint. So yes, it's very expensive to do it, but idea is capable of sustaining. And luckily it has a biofuel lab which can provide 99% of electricity, so we are able to do that. And but it's not expensive electricity in this area because of near Niagara Falls. So we were able to go through different metrics, but idea was to turn the toxic site, toxic deficit into ecological asset, and then come up with a building prototype which can survive and harvest its own resource use. And especially gray water, it harvests, there's a 8,000-gallon rainwater system collecting tanks, so it collects rainwater. All the water uses in this particular building is done by the water they harvest. Green roof, they're testing different type of specimen of green roof to see what's most workable or what doesn't work. So it's really testing. So these are different type of snow storage were interesting because we came up with a matrix that with the amount of snow they have, they can definitely cool this building. Syracuse has a very cold, climate, minus 20 and sometimes 40 degrees. So it has, one of the reasons they were selected, this site is not like San Francisco. This has a huge variation, so it had to do both cooling and heating. And we could have done it, but geothermal was much more inexpensive and efficient. We needed a huge amount of snow storage, a lot of people to, I think you all know how to deal with snow by now, but it's labor intensive. So and limiting the width of a building for maximizing daylighting, and external shading, which we really sandwiched between two glazing like that, Ecolite, so that it just monitors and closes within 15-degree increments. And heat recovery system, cross ventilation is completely possible. We have a highway next to it. Computer lights up in green when there's no pollution, so that one can actually open up the system. This is displacement ventilation, but you can control it, so override it to have into natural ventilation mode. As opposed to Darwin Martin House, this one has a ceiling panel, both heating and cooling, which is less expensive. Again, it's a little more affordable for office building prototype. And that's one of the reasons is to come up with a system which is legible, which can be replicated in many different places. A geothermal ground source heat pump, radiant ceiling, and exhaust duct, which saves a lot. So there's snow, a lot of snow in Syracuse, and snow storage idea. Wind turbine, the building is bent to have optimum wind turbine, and also they would change different type of wind turbines. It's not much, 10%, but again, this is a demonstration factory about this. In biomass, cogeneration, which they use fast growth willow in upstate New York like that, which can provide 93%. But now I think what they're doing is using a paper pulp, and they have a toxic waste. By their biofuels, they could neutralize the toxicity, and using that pulp waste into biomass generation, and then they come up with non-toxic waste, and paper company pays to do that. So they're coming up with really interesting partnerships to come up with using some other people's waste turning into gold. So this is a bottom line as compared to actually what we have come up with. And we had, as I said, opening, and this is kind of, that's Mark Robbins, Dean of Syracuse. He was wearing the right clothes, that's why I photographed him in the corridors, and people were coming through. So what's interesting about the Syracuse is this is where Iroquois League has formed in 1100s, where 5 nations, indigenous nations, came together. They have the world first democratic constitution. In the constitution, it says it is imperative to, in any deliberation, to consider the impact of 7th generation. So that's written up. So in this project, they always talked about 7th generation, what are we doing, what can we do? So it's kind of really amazing experience for me to work on this. And so it's still, I think, this is some time ago, but it's kind of going through. So last project I show is idea of a paradigm shift in the way we talked about master architect, and then we talked about mentorship, and then this new way of thinking, how do you change building, such as uses 40% of energy, sometimes responsible for up to 70% of CO2 emission. It's a toxic asset. So how do you change that into a real ecological asset? Became a real important thing for me to think about. And I started think tank last January just because I was inspired Obama about the change. I thought we really have to start thinking about what to do. So I have a Vision Arc, which is think tank, and many students in summertime are employed to work with them. And I came up with this idea of design blind spots to really look at where we are not operating as architects, where we should really focusing on global issues. And this was done for Minister of Culture in Singapore. They invited 9 groups globally to really think about 2050. So this is something that a little bit of outline of what I'm showing is the fact that we only think of built environment. We kind of are isolated for when you really look at global issues. But 2050, these are the issues we probably have to deal with, from geopolitics to government, education, health, and community. One of the inspiration for me is I've been delegates at World Economic Forum Davos, and there are very few architects represented. Me, Bill McDonald, and Cameron Sinclair, that's it. And this year, Jean Nouvel, Toyo Ito came to speak. But They talk about architecture all the time, global governance of architecture, architectural global policy, but they don't know what architecture is. It just is a nice word for them to legitimize what they really cannot do. So I was getting very frustrated. But through this vision arc, I was trying to really do both ways. One is to engage us as architects to issues we are not engaged with, but engage a global community into the way we think. So this kind of beginning of how we're working. And we picked through internet and journalism all the predictions from now to 2050 about all these issues. It's quite incredible. And then what we did is what no one is doing is connecting dots as to really looking at comprehensive issues. Everybody is in different silos. In World Economic Forum, there are 70 different councils, from security to population to water. They are interrelated issues, but there's no interrelationship. So this is an attempt to just really do it in terms of population, for example. By 2030, total world population reached more than 8.3 billion people. We can't control it. It needs to be managed, meaning that because it really has to do with improved mortality and also maternal mortality and infant mortality, and also longevity, that this is a fact we have to face. And 38% inhabit rural landscapes, 60% live in urban environment. And when you look at another little funny facts, but 2025, we picked up the facts, but that the gallon use, energy use of airplanes will not improve that much by 2025, which really makes this airplane travel an obsolete alternative. It's really not an alternative, so we probably have to think about some other type of infrastructure. And of course, 2050 population growth, 70% US population will be in a metropolitan area. It's going to be highly urbanized, so there's a real disparity between rural and urban. And at the same time, we looked at that from a 21st century, beginning of a 21st century, 50 million acres of US forests have been converted to developed uses for increased population, 120 million people, which means like 20 acres plus per person, there's forest is being destroyed. So can we connect dots about that? Why are we not talking together about that? So in a way, we identify blind spots. By conclusion we are coming up with, we think probably the urban area and rural area, there's going to be blurring zones. And in that, there's issue of transportation, not as equally dispersed road network, but more different type of intense layout. Climate change, as we know, Arctic air temperature increased at twice the rate of rest of impacting Arctic sea ice. And then Arctic ice cap is receding. So these are the things we have observed even before debate of who's talking about what temperature and what, but this is physically proven fact. And North Pole is devoid of summer sea ice if it goes at this rate. So if that's the effect, how does something like climate change, which is very abstract, how can we make it much more discrete issues like a fish decline, 70% decrease by 2030 of habitat of fish, which we eat. By 2040, sea coral mortality because of acidification, ocean acidification. And I was telling somebody, the reason I've been here in Washington, D.C. is I've been collaborating with Natural Resources Defense Council. They've been doing a lot of research in ocean acidification, and ocean absorbs like 20% of CO2. So it's invisible, we don't know it, but there's an amazing amount of damage being done to it, which is food supply sources, so that's something else. And then how the Arctic ice is melting and population of polar bears recede. So how do we identify forest, animals, and fish, and so forth? And initiatives to develop integrated global water monitoring system. This all relates to water and maybe fresh water, ocean water, engage interagency ocean inland water bodies governance. Survey monitoring, something we can very well. And then in terms of looking at that related to biodiversity in water, use of water is available fresh water, which is drinkable fresh water is only half of 1% of available water. So we are one of a few countries that wash automobile with drinkable water, which is amazing. In 2025, 2/3 of the world's population were living with conditions of severe water shortage. This is all predictions which is done by somebody else, which we kind of extracted. So what we're doing is connecting dots, and 1/3 with absolute water scarcity. But then it's interesting, ethanol production will increase 2015, but it uses a lot of water, and then it results in effluent outflow, which is creating more of a dead zone in coastal area where no plants or no animals or fish can live. This is a devastating consequences. And freshwater use predicted to have 2030 660 billion cubic meter per year, which is dominated by electricity production and agriculture. So there's got to be something wrong in this picture, right? And it's crazy that no one has connected them. So there's a kind of blind spots. And design initiatives such as global guidance for mixed energy, natural infrastructure, and then having kind of large-scale irrigation technology. So these are kind of proposals that we are working with different people about this. And lastly, this new opportunity, we did a very in-depth case study, which I don't go into details about oil sands mining at Alberta, Canada, because it's such an amazing, it's destroying boreal forest, which absorbs 3 to 5 times more CO2 than Amazon rainforest. It's really one of the biggest surviving forests to extract oil using natural gas. And then it's dirty mining, which is incredibly using a lot of water, fresh water, and inefficient. And it's done for a reason which is safe, it's neighbor countries, it's close, it's secure oil. So in a way, we probably got ourselves into complex an issue, but predicting about it, this is actually how by 2025, we'll really propose for soil, air, water monitoring systems, surveying it. By 2030, forest relocation, remediation strategy, which is already being destroyed. There's no remediation strategy. By 2035, is there any low impact transportation system which uses renewable energy and then collaborated with land use policy and environment? 2040, integrating energy and agricultural systems. In 2045, in the forest and grassland development initiatives, somehow correlating to idea of intensification. And then by last 2050, integrating natural mobility of migration corridor and conservation and development. So these are the kind of very large visions that we are trying to do. And this is, I like to talk about last about paradigm shift in a way, which we talked about. I think that area in which Frank Lloyd Wright, Paul Rudolph, Marcel Breuer may be very different today. I think unless we really share information, work with other sectors, get ourselves from side of architects and designers and collaborate, I think we might not have a very bright future. But on the other side, what I'm saying by this particular think tank, and we've been reaching out to ocean energy people in RDC, there is a positive results we can make by coming up with the way architects think, and then to collaborate for the future of a sustainable future. So thank you very much for a long evening.
Thank you, Toshiko. Thank you very much. I'm afraid we have run out of time, so we will not be able to entertain any questions. But I do want to thank the Beverly Willis Foundation and Bev Willis for supporting this program this evening. And please join me in thanking Toshiko for a wonderful presentation.